and we're going to go live on Facebook now. Okay, we're live on Facebook as well. Okay, so greetings to all those joining us both in South Africa and internationally for the 5th seminar in our 10-part series on climate change. I'm Professor David Wiltschitz, Director of the South African Institute for Advanced Constitutional Public Human Rights and International Law, SAIFAC, a center in the Faculty of Law of the University of Johannesburg, and we are delighted to be the hosts of the series. The series was created to bring together leading experts who would explore various aspects of climate change from the perspective of multiple disciplines and can help achieve these goals. Through the carefully designed topics, we delve into science, law, policy, and social justice, and will Hi, everyone. Did you hear me or was I muted?
I just lost you for a few seconds.
Sorry?
I think I muted you by mistake. Sorry.
Oh, was I muted by someone? Okay. So I was just saying that the purpose of the series was to look at a range of topics such as science, law, policy, and social justice, and to expose participants to key debates in these areas. I want to pay tribute to the multidisciplinary organizing team for their vision and leadership. They are Professor Kitty Dumont, Professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of South Africa, Dr. Jenny Hall, Department of Procedural Law at the University of Johannesburg, Professor Diane Hildebrand, Director of the Institute for the Development of Energy and for African Sustainability at the University of South Africa, Professor Lwazi Ngubevana, Director of the African Energy Leadership Center at Wits Business School, and Professor Colleen Fogel, Distinguished Professor at the Global Change Institute at the University of the Witwatersrand. I also want to thank our partner Constitutional Hill for their support. And from the SAIFAC side, I would like to thank Ropafatso Maposa and Naomi Hove for their work on the administrative side, and Ibrahim Karim for designing our posters. Tonight, we only have 100 places in the Zoom conversation, but we are also streaming live on the SAIFAC Facebook page. So please join us there as well, and welcome to our viewers on Facebook. We are delighted to have with us today to deliver the keynote address, Dr. Dolf, the Director for Innovation and Technology of the International Renewable Energy Agency. And he will address the topic of who produces CO2 and why, what are the options and technologies for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We very much look forward to his talk. And before moving to that, I just want to mention that our next seminar will be on the 29th of July in 3 weeks. And the keynote speaker will be Joanne Garwich, the CEO of the National Business Initiative, and she will address the question of increasing pressure and increasing implications for the business sector. And I'll put the link there for you to RSVP. We'll also include the Zoom links for those who want to join. I'm now going to hand over to the chair for the seminar, Professor Lwazi Ngubevana. Lwazi is a chemical engineer, energy executive, and academic with extensive global experience in renewable energy investments, advisory, environment, and water desalination industries. He holds a PhD in chemical engineering and an MBA from the University of the Witwatersrand, where he is now the director of the African Energy Center at the Wits Business School. Without further ado, over to you, Lwazi.
Thank you, David. Firstly, I think I would like to welcome everybody, wherever you're joining us from. So whether it's good evening, late afternoon, or good morning to you, thank you so much for taking our time to spend your 1 hour with us. We look forward to giving you what I think will be a fantastic engagement. Now, when we talk about producing CO2, climate change, sustainability, it is rather unfortunate that the energy industry is one of at least the major culprits. And today we really are fortunate to have somebody, we couldn't have asked for a better person to come and speak to us, in fact, on this topic than Dr. Dolf Giesen. As David has already said, Dolf is the Director for Innovation and Technology at IRENA. This is since 2011. Dolf has got more than 25 years experience, in energy transition strategy development and implementation as well. But also as technology policy in the international context. Dolf is a PhD from Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. We really could not have asked for a better speaker for today's topic. And without further ado, I will hand over to Dolf. And thank you so much for taking your time to speak to us. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lazi, for these kind words. Much appreciated, and it's a great pleasure to address you today. To give you a little bit of a background, so I work for the International Renewable Energy Agency, and I'm responsible for the work on innovation and technology. Our mandate is to help our members in accelerating their renewables deployment and in their energy transition. And our members are countries. So at the moment, I think 167 or 168 countries, plus another 20 or so countries in the process of accession. So it's really a global agency. And I must say, I find that a very interesting aspect. So you have then let's say countries which have really very different energy issues and also very different energy solutions going forward. And what we try to bring then also to the table is the exchange between these countries in how to best grow these renewables. And we collect data. We also do some analysis to support the countries. So that includes power systems analysis. And I'll show you some results for recent studies we've done for Africa. I have prepared a slide deck. I'll go through quickly. I have about 30 slides. It's split into two parts. First, a global outlook. So our recently published World Energy Transitions Outlook. It's the first time we've issued a 1.5-degree pathway. And I'll talk a little bit about the implications for the supply side, but also for the energy demand side. And then I'll go a little bit more in detail for this recent study on the Eastern and Southern African power pool. So to put it a little bit into context, here is a graph taken from the Global Carbon Project on the global energy consumption, the development over the last 50 years or so. And you can see that there has been a continuous rapid rise in deployment of fossil fuels. You see even a strong acceleration for coal between 2000 and 2010. That was mainly, let's say, the China effect. And at the bottom of this graph, you see the deployment of renewables, which has also continuously increased, but not in absolute terms at the same levels. And so the share of renewable energy in primary energy has not significantly changed over this period. It may also be a surprise that if you look at what are the most important renewables, it's bioenergy and hydro. While most talk at the moment is about wind and solar, and you see that the shares of these is still not that significant. So all of this has to change now in the next 30 years if we want to meet the climate goals. So you can see there is a very significant challenge. And here's another graph to illustrate what does it now mean for regions. You see that especially the CO2 emissions in Asia have skyrocketed over the last 20 years. Asia is by now by far the largest source of emissions. It's notably China and India. You see that the emissions in Europe and North America have stabilized or somewhat declined. And you see that Africa, in this whole climate CO2 emission issue, is still a relatively minor source of emissions. Of course, Africa is an important exporter of fossil fuels. So in that context, it plays an important role in this debate. Now, looking at renewables, so the poster child of renewables is really renewable power. The driver for accelerated renewable power deployment is the cost reduction. So last year, again, the cost fell somewhere between 7 and 16% for different technologies. And these renewables are now have become very cheap, and they're even cheaper than, increasingly cheaper than operating costs for existing coal plants. So really low cost, especially solar PV and onshore wind. And the result of these low costs has been that the deployment has continuously increased. So last year was again a record year, despite the COVID crisis. There were around 260 gigawatts of renewable power added last year. And so the amount, the capacity addition of renewables is now already for quite some time, since 2012, higher than the amount of non-renewables that is being added, and the gap continues to grow. So renewables account for around 85% of capacity additions last year. And as a consequence of that, the share of renewables in the global power mix also increases by, in recent years, about a percentage point per year. And so last year, around 30% of all electricity that was generated worldwide was of renewable sources. And so what this graph shows is the cost competitiveness of renewables and how that has improved over the last 10 years. This is based on our annual roundup of renewable power generation cost. The last report was issued 2 weeks ago. And you see that for solar PV, the global average generation cost for new capacity added in 2020 was 5.7 US cents per kilowatt hour. And you see that for onshore wind, it was even below 4 cents per kilowatt hour on average. The dots indicate the cost range, and the dot size is proportional to the size of the projects at different cost levels. So you see that there are some PV costs at less than 2 cents per kilowatt hour. There are also some onshore wind costs at less than 2 cents per kilowatt hour. So there is some very low cost projects out there, and that is of course very encouraging, and that opens up an economic opportunity for energy transition. So going forward, economics is a key driver, but there's another key driver, and that is the climate change mitigation. So that is something we have been looking at for some years. In previous years, we issued 2-degree scenarios. This year, for the first time, we issued a 1.5-degree scenario at the request of our member countries, which, by the way, also includes South Africa. And 1.5 degree scenario means net zero emissions by 2050. So it's a tremendous change in development from what we have seen in recent decades. There is a consensus on what is needed to get there. We need to phase out coal-based power generation rapidly. We need to accelerate the deployment of renewable power. To do that, we need higher flexibility of power systems to enable the integration of high shares of solar and wind. And then we need to think about the end-use sectors, what to do in transport, heating, and buildings. So there, direct electrification with renewable power is important, and also the use of clean hydrogen can play an important role, as well as bioenergy. Still, that is not enough. We will also need CCS, notably in the industry sector, and we also find an important role in our scenarios for BECCS. Let's say on biomass and on BECCS and CCS in general, there are different opinions. And of course, we need also to use energy wisely and efficiently. So we need, what you see here on this graph is the yellow line is what happens with the planned, what we call planned energy scenario. It includes also the nationally determined contributions submitted for the Paris Climate Agreement. You see that would roughly result in a stabilization of global emissions, which is already a significant decoupling from GDP, because GDP in this period increases 2.5-fold, but of course it's not enough. We don't need a stabilization, we need net zero emissions by 2050. And for that, we need significant emission reductions, first of all, in power generation, which is the largest source of emissions today, but also in the end-use sectors, in industry, in transport, and to a lesser extent also in buildings. And I should also say we need a continuous emissions decline. It's almost a linear decline, which means that already in 2030, we will need emissions that are significantly reduced compared to today's level. So it's not just a 2050 discussion. The challenge this year is to put policies in place that yield that emissions reduction we need the coming 9 years. So it's all really urgent now, and that's why you see such a tremendous interest at the moment in energy transition and in climate issues. That's also why energy is on the agenda for the UN again in September for the first time in 40 years. And of course, COP26 towards the end of the year is another critical moment for the global discussion on this. So in this 1.5 degree pathway that we calculated as the best way to get to this decarbonization, the share of renewables would grow tremendously from around 14% of primary energy to 74% of primary energy. Energy use in absolute terms would be roughly stable at today's level. So you see, compared to the policies in place scenario, that would be a significant acceleration of renewables deployment, and we need about an 8-fold increase of the effort for renewables deployment, and a 2.5-fold increase in the rate of energy intensity to make this happen. So we need a lot of renewable power, but we also need to think about the end-use sectors. And the main shift there is from fossil fuels to direct use of electricity. So for example, electromobility, but also heat pumps for heating of buildings. And you see that the use of hydrogen is significant, especially the use of green hydrogen. There's a light green area here. So that is hydrogen produced with renewable power through water electrolysis. And you see that also modern biomass plays a significant role in our scenario. So there are six main components to this energy transition strategy. First of all, renewables on the supply side, so renewable power, but also direct use of biomass, much higher energy efficiency, and electrification of end users. So these are the three key strategy components that together account for around 70% of the emissions reduction. Then we have the use of clean hydrogen, and we have the use of CCS, including biomass CCS. So these are the six key components. Let's say on these last two components, there are different opinions, but on the components of renewable power, energy efficiency, and electrification, I would say there is a consensus across all scenarios that we have analyzed, that these are the three key pillars of the energy transition. Now, the implication of this energy transition is that the use of fossil fuels will decline significantly. Initially, you see a rapid decline in coal use. Later on, also the rapid decline in oil use. And also the gas use in 2050 is lower than it is today. Overall, fossil fuels, and especially natural gas, still play an important role in 2050, but it's a quarter of the consumption at the current levels. So much reduced dependence on fossil fuels. I want to highlight the implication for natural gas, because there is at the moment an important discussion in an African context about growing natural gas production. So what you see here are the results from 6 recent leading global scenarios on what will be natural gas consumption in 2050 in a 1.5 degree compatible scenario. And you see that there is only one scenario developed by Total Energies today, that says there will be a growth in natural gas use, slight growth. And there are 5 scenarios that say there will be a significant decline in natural gas use in such a scenario. So the implications of decarbonization on fossil fuel use are significant, but it's not only oil and coal use, it's also natural gas use that may be significantly affected. And that is really an important factor to take into account if you talk about investments into gas production in Africa today. So the market outlook may not be that rosy going forward. The outlook for electricity production, on the other hand, is very bullish. So we will need a lot of electricity and rapid electricity growth to decarbonize. In our scenario, we have a 3-fold growth of global electricity consumption between now and 2050, from 22,000 terawatt hours to 70,000 terawatt hours. And you see that it's a rapid growth in the existing demand sectors, so especially in transport and in buildings. But you see also that green hydrogen production grows rapidly. Green hydrogen production with renewable electricity, and most of that hydrogen is used in industry sectors. So that is a completely new demand category that doesn't exist today. And on the supply side, that means a massive shift in 2 ways. First of all, we need much more electricity generation, more than 75,000 terawatt hours. and we need a shift in the electricity generation mix. So less fossil fuels and very significant growth in renewables-based power generation. And you can see the amounts. There is about 8,000 gigawatts of wind capacity, over 8,000 gigawatts of wind capacity in that scenario in 2050. And you can see there is about 15,000 gigawatts of solar capacity in that scenario by 2050. So the growth of solar and wind compared to today's levels of around 700, 800 gigawatts each is tremendous. So global massive deployment of solar and wind. Now, if the share of solar and wind indeed grows to 63% of total generation, we need much more flexibility in power systems to integrate these renewables. We need enabling technologies, more grids, more storage, more hydrogen also for storage. We also need changes in the market design. So we need electricity prices that reflect scarcity. We need different forms of systems operation, for example, much more, make better use of the existing transmission grids. And we also need new types of business models. So, for example, aggregators that sell services from distributed energy resources. We also need more peer-to-peer trading, etc. We looked at this in great detail. We identified 30 forms of innovation in these 4 main dimensions. And we have developed some solutions, how you can combine these innovations and deploy them into power systems. And we're currently having discussions with regulators, with system operators in countries, how to deploy this toolkit in a national context, because each power system is a bit different. Now, on the investment side, the additional investments for this significant transition are in fact not that significant. The absolute investment needs are about a third higher than what they would be in the reference scenario. So instead of 100 trillion between now and 2050, we need about 131 trillion. So the additional investments is in the order of $1 trillion per year. Of course, still a significant amount, but it's in the order of 1% of global GDP today. But what you see is that the type of investments changes significantly. So significantly reduced investments in fossil fuel supply. That share drops from 44 to 12%, and we see that the investments, especially in renewables generation and in electrification and enabling infrastructure, grows very significantly. So the investment outlook, investment needs on the supply side and in the smart grids and electrification increase significantly. Now, from a policy perspective, there is a strong rationale for such transition because the benefits exceed the costs significantly. And benefits come in the form of reduced externalities, especially reduced air pollution and reduced climate externalities. So the benefits exceed the costs by a factor 2 to 5.5. So this gives, let's say, a strong incentive, a strong rationale to policies to pursue such a transition. And so if you're skeptical about climate change, I think less and less people are skeptical. If you look at what's happening today, it's already very scary, but even local air pollution alone would already provide a strong incentive for such transition. And we get a lot of questions around, okay, can we make such a transition? Can we create socioeconomic benefits? Can we create jobs? Can we create additional economic growth? We also look a lot at these factors. So here are some numbers. Here are numbers on global jobs of this transition scenario. So if you compare these two bars, then you see that there is around 8 to 10 million additional jobs. But because of this transition, net additional jobs, so in the order of 8 to 10% additional jobs. You see them broken down here by segments. So of course, less fossil fuel jobs, but more jobs especially in renewables. And here you see the breakdown of these jobs in different components. So you see that especially the jobs in construction, installation, and in manufacturing increase. And if you look just at the renewables jobs, then these increase even stronger. In absolute terms, there would be 43 million jobs in renewables in 2050, compared to the 15-16 million jobs at the current level. And here you see the breakdown by technology where these jobs will be. So see, for example, a significant number of jobs in solar PV, which is about a third of all renewables jobs. Now I come to the second part of my presentation, and that is the analysis for Africa. So we issued this year 2 important reports. First of all, one on renewable energy transition in Africa, which is an analysis for Africa as a whole. That report was issued in March, and then in April we issued a deep dive for Eastern and Southern Africa power pools. There is at the moment important follow-up work going on. Together, we were asked by the African Union to assist with our tools also in the development of the Africa master plan, and that is currently, that work is ongoing now, and I'll show you some of the results that are the basis for that. So we have been working on scenarios, and especially power sector scenarios for Africa for a long time, the past 10 years. We've issued reports for the different power pools. We've also issued a broader roadmap for Africa already some years ago. Currently, an update of that work is ongoing. We've done a lot of work also at the country level. So energy sector planning advice, for example, for Eswatini, for Sierra Leone, currently work for Cameroon is ongoing, and a lot of other work around capacity building and providing support for planning in Africa. One of the key tools we use for that is a model for the African power sector. It's a country-by-country model. It's based on the message modeling framework. Was developed in cooperation with the IAEA. We call it the SPLAT model. And for that model, we used our existing data sets for the renewable costing, for the demand and for the renewables resources and the infrastructure. We significantly refined existing message models, and we did that in close cooperation with experts, with African experts, with the utilities and the system operators, and the power pool experts. And as said, we had a lot of discussions over the years to further refine that and to provide inputs to the different planning models, planning processes. Now, if you look at renewables uptake in the power sector in Africa, so the share has been more or less stable. But you see that there has been an acceleration in recent years. Initially, it was mainly hydropower, but in recent years, significant additions of onshore wind and also solar PV is rapidly picking up. And we think that this growth will continue to accelerate in the coming years because of the economics. The resource potential is excellent, but of course you need to look at it to the location specifics. So we do also a lot of analysis of these resources. On the leftmost side, you see the solar resource analysis, and the dark red are places with excellent resource. So the capacity factor of that solar PV is nearly twice of the capacity factor of solar PV in a country like Germany. So that means you can get a lot more kilowatt hours per megawatt, nearly twice as much. And you see also for the wind that there are some locations with excellent wind resources, notably here Kenya and the Horn of Africa, with 50% wind factor, but you see also the Red Sea, for example, and of course the resource in South Africa and part of the East Coast is also quite good. So we use that type of information to do power sector analysis. Here you see results for the Eastern African power pool, Southern African power pool, and Western African power pool. You see the results as they are in the current master plans, and you see what we calculated as the optimal mix, without even taking any CO2 considerations into account. This is just based on the technology economics. And you see that the optimal mix would include significantly less coal and significantly more renewables. These results you can find, for example, in that report which I just showed for the Eastern and Southern African power pools. But you see that also for the Western African power pool, recommendation would be some more, for example, also biomass in there. So this is result for the Eastern and Southern African power pool, and you see that the optimal mix would include significantly more solar PV. It's the yellow area here at the top, and you see also more rapid wind growth. That is this gray area. So this shows what the growth potential is going forward. So you see that there would go from around 50 gigawatts, mainly hydropower here at the beginning, to something in the order of more than 300 gigawatts of renewable power by 2040. So means that there is a potential, just an economic potential, to add more to add significant amounts of new renewable capacity in the order of 300 gigawatts. So, in conclusion, we see that not only the IRENA scenarios, but all scenarios that at least we have recently analyzed suggest that renewables have a key role to play going forward because of the favorable economics and because of the climate mitigation challenge. We see that globally, but also for specific African power pools and African countries. But of course, the mix varies a little bit by country. We see that if you start decarbonizing, then electrification has a key role to play. Current discussion is very much focused on electromobility. We see electric cars the uptake is rapidly growing. I haven't gone into that in great detail in my presentation today, but all signs are that 20, 30 years down the road, the majority of cars will be electric, and even trucks and commercial vehicles will be increasingly electric. While, for example, in aviation and in shipping, green hydrogen and green hydrogen derivatives such as ammonia, green ammonia will play an increasing role as fuel. We see that also the industry sector, that electrification and use of hydrogen will play an increasing role. But also biomass, for example, as feedstock for synthetic organic chemicals has a key role to play, and maybe also in cement production. To make this transition happen, we need to accelerate renewables uptake significantly. Initially, especially in the power sector, where we need roughly a threefold increase of global renewables deployment. And to make that happen, we also need to think about systemic innovation to create the flexibility that we need. And that flexibility needs to come from not only new hardware, new technology, but also from new market designs, new types of system operation, and new business models. And of course, there's an important role for governments and for regulators to streamline the planning and to roll out enabling infrastructure, such as enabling transmission grids. So that concludes my presentation. All the results I showed you are in the public domain, and all these reports are available for download from our IRENA website. So I very much encourage you to have a look there, and we're happy to provide further details if you are interested. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dolf, for that very informative presentation. First, I would like to just encourage our participants to post your questions on the chat. But if you would rather ask a question verbally, do raise your hand and we will attend to them. We do have a few minutes with Dolf. There is already a number of questions, Dolf, that I would like you to maybe try and address from our participants. I think the first thing really being that this is we understand that Africa is probably the one region that's going to be most impacted by climate change. the question is, what do you see as the key barriers, I suppose, for Africa in terms of transitioning, to more renewables? And also, I think in part with that, Africa being a low contributor, at least, on the global scale, to CO2 emissions, is there a responsibility on Africa to ensure that we as a continent, transition at the same rate as the rest of the world? Or should it be that, the Western world or the advanced economies, should shoulder a little bit more of the responsibility to ensure that we keep, we keep the temperature increase to below, 2 degrees Celsius. Yeah, I think that would be the first question, and then I'll move on to a couple more questions that we have from our guests here.
Yeah, thank you for that question. You're absolutely right, and as I also showed in the numbers, I mean, today's contribution of Africa, and especially sub-Saharan Africa in the emissions is not that significant. Of course, I also showed what is in these master plans, and there's a lot of new coal capacity in these master plans. But at the same time, our analysis suggests that the costs profile of technologies has changed very rapidly in recent years. And if you take the latest cost numbers into account, then a coal expansion would not be the most economic way to provide that electricity. So what is really critical for the coming years is to make sure that you make decisions based on the latest information. So you can pick the most economic investment, and therefore what I also mentioned, this project with the African Union is for us a very important project, and that's why we also work so much with the power pools to make sure that the latest information is on the table. Of course, there is still a commitment from the Paris Agreement to make 100 billion available to developing countries. That has not yet happened, and that is a priority. Also, as we go now into these discussions at the COP at the end of the year, because that was one of the agreements from Paris. Another aspect here is of course the cost of financing. So these renewable technologies have relatively high upfront investment cost, and the cost of financing still varies a lot worldwide. So for that costing report, we again looked at the cost of financing, and we found a range from 2-3% in the cost in countries with the lowest cost to more than 20%. And cost of financing, so finding ways to bring down the cost of financing is probably a key enabler also for renewables deployment, also in Africa. And so there is thinking ongoing on what can be done also from the perspective of development partners to bring these cost of financing down to enable these investments. But there is also a role for governments in Africa to provide the right guidance. So revision of these master plans is a key step there, and providing the signals about the enabling of, let's say, the investment priorities for the right transmission lines is also an important part of that.
Thank you very much for that. You know, one of the criticisms, I suppose, of the push towards you know, more renewables across the continent here is that we cannot have a energy transition that is not just. And for us, a just energy transition includes, at the least, the protection of jobs in our coal sectors, and ensuring that as we transition, we include everybody. What would be your comment to that criticism? And I think some of it really is based on the fact that primarily Africa imports, you know, solar and wind technologies. That we were not a developer, so we really are just a consumer of these technologies. And this many a time is, you know, seen as, you know, Africa once again continuing to support almost shoulder, you know, the world. What would be your comments to that?
Yeah, it's an aspect where we get questions, let's say, not only from Africa, we get these questions from all over the place. Yeah. If you look at the cost structure of, say, a solar PV project, then the panels account today maybe for a third of the cost. So other components are 2/3 of the cost, and there is already a significant local installation component. If you look at the wind project, also the local installation component is significant, but also there are some components in a wind turbine that are difficult to transport. So if you have the tower, that is not, let's say, high tech, but it's a significant cost component or significant value added. If you have the blades, and especially if you have these large modern turbines, which may have blades of 80 meters. I mean, for offshore turbines, we're talking even 100 meters now. You're not gonna ship them over the world. It's just not very handy to ship these. So you have to then actively pursue also possibilities for local or at least regional manufacturing for these components, and that can create the value added. The question is a little bit: should you write that already in the auction documents? Huh? On one hand, it is a way to ensure that there is that local value added. On the other hand, it shouldn't be too prescriptive that it raises the cost of the technology significantly. So on one hand, you can do it through that type of mechanism, but at the same time, then you also need to support that local manufacturing to really make it happen. So that renewables deployment policy needs to be combined and also with an industry policy.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. Here's a question I think you probably had to answer a few times. And the question is, why can't we leverage nuclear a bit more, you know, on this journey towards increased electricity production?
Well, I mean, you can, that is a choice. I mean, of course, nuclear is an established technology, but for example, what we've seen in Europe is that the cost of new nuclear power generation, if you look at the LCOE, it's quite expensive. So we're talking 15 cents plus, 15 US cents plus for generation cost. And so if you compare that with these solar PV and wind costs that I showed, then there is quite a cost gap. So that is the main reason why the attention has shifted to these renewables investments. And there has been, let's say, some efforts to develop small scale nuclear also as a solution, but economies of scale play a big role in nuclear. So going to small scale nuclear makes it even worse. So that has been a main reason why the share of nuclear in global power generation has been falling in recent years. So and that's also why in our scenarios we have nuclear at roughly the same level as it has been historically, but we don't see an incentive for a major nuclear expansion.
Thank you. And there is a question also, I suppose, part comment on the issue of jobs in the numbers that you presented. And the question is, you know, is this relatively small increase in jobs, does it take into account the huge growth really that's needed in generation by 2050?
I mean, we took into account the capacity expansion numbers that I showed, and the job creation numbers are based on our assessment of jobs in the supply chain. So we looked at in quite detail not only at the installation jobs, but also the jobs in O&M, and also the jobs in producing the materials that are needed for, say, the wind turbine or the solar PV panel. So I mean, this is our latest assessment. We are talking to also the associations. For example, earlier this week, I had a discussion with the Global Wind Energy Council on these numbers. And they said, well, we think that your wind numbers are a bit low on jobs. We think that there is a larger job potential creation in wind. So, I mean, this is our latest numbers. But we continue to have that discussion with the industry and see how we can further refine that. And in the end, of course, it's not so much about global numbers. People are interested in what does it mean in our national context, and can we create national jobs through such a transition. So that is going forward probably where we will focus more.
No, thank you for that. And then I've got a couple of questions around storage. I guess the first one is, well, is there really a way to get around energy storage and to make this more affordable, make it easier, you know, for dispatchability? How do we, I suppose, how do we take IRENA's numbers as they are, that we're showing that, you know, renewables are energy, or rather the cost is competitive. But how do we overcome this issue of intermittency and storage?
Yeah, so the magic word is flexibility, and flexibility comes in many forms. So better geographical spread of the generation or better interconnection is an important part of it. You need to make sure that you don't rely on a single technology. So it's not only solar PV or only onshore wind, but if you mix in solar PV with onshore wind, with offshore wind, and maybe also some CSP, it already looks better. There's also, of course, the more dispatchable renewables, for example, bioenergy. I mean, in Africa with hydropower, you have a seasonality issue. So it's a very specific problem. We also looked at in the context of the study that I showed, but I didn't go into these details today. Talking about storage, we see, for example, a significant potential to tap into car batteries and vehicle batteries, also to use them as a source of flexibility. So the amount of batteries that will come on stream in cars will by far dwarf the amount of batteries that will come on stream on the grid. And so if you can use some of these car batteries through smart charging and maybe even through vehicle to grid, that will greatly alleviate also the need for batteries on the grid. I presented the numbers for green hydrogen. So in this scenario, there is about 5,000 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity. And these electrolyzers can add flexibility, but at the same time, part of that hydrogen is used for also more seasonal types of storage. And that also helps then with future flexibility. So it's a combination. Let's say that power system of the future will operate very different from today's power system. Today's flexibility comes from fossil plants that are dispatchable, and the future flexibility will much more come from that demand side. And the demand side will look very differently, first of all, because you have all these batteries on the demand side. You will have all that green hydrogen generation on the demand side, the electrolyzers, and at the same time, you have that much higher level of electrification of the demand side. And so there will be much more demand response also.
Okay. Thank you for that, Dolf. Another one on storage. The question is your numbers. As much as it's showing that renewables are competitive, do these numbers include storage in the cost?
So the LCOE numbers I showed do not include storage, the LCOE numbers for today. But the system cost analysis that I showed and the investment costs that I showed, they also include that storage component.
Okay, thank you. Another one, this was from Prof. Glasser. The question is on carbon capture and storage. And has anybody looked at it using the deep ocean as a CO2 reservoir? And if they have, what's been the result like? Is there anything commercially promising?
So that CO2 storage option was very much discussed 20 years ago or so. And because of the potential impact on the sea life, basically that was stopped, that option. I haven't seen much in recent years because of potential environmental impacts. there is still a lot of work going on in storage in, let's say, below the seabed. For example, in Norway now, there are significant developments of such subsea storage. The reason being that there is a significant potential also for onshore underground storage. But what we see is that in parts of the world, for example, in Northwest Europe, there is a lot of this concerns of local residents about this underground storage onshore, and that's why they're looking at the offshore underground storage, where there's less of such concerns. In general, the cost of storage are not that significant, but of course, if you have to start transporting CO2 over large distances, for example, offshore storage, that adds cost, and we're talking for these Norwegian projects. So they're thinking of capturing the CO2 onshore, say in the Netherlands or in France, and then shipping it to Norway and store it there offshore underground, and that creates additional cost in the order of $50 to $100 per ton of CO2. So technically it can be done, but it comes at a cost.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And we do have another question from Diane, and it says, our initial research shows that low-income users actually prefer centralized energy systems than decentralized systems. Well, you know, where the user is responsible for managing the system. Now, question is, has Irina looked at how attitudes of governments and societies could be a barrier in the energy transition?
We look at off-grid systems, both home systems and also mini-grids. We also look at grid expansion as a solution, and we think going forward it will be a mix of both to enhance electrification levels in Africa. For sure, in a more urban environment, and that plays an increasing role in Africa going forward, centralized solutions will play a more important role. But we think in rural settings, there is also an important role for off-grid systems to achieve a more rapid electrification. And then you have to see longer term whether longer term you stay with these off-grid systems or you can integrate them also in a more centralized solution.
All right, thank you. I do not see any more questions, but I do have one. I'd just like to get your views on this, on what is sometimes a controversial discussion on the value of gas in the energy transition. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I showed you that one slide on natural gas because I know it is a very contested discussion in Africa. So gas is a much cleaner fuel than coal. A gas power plant emits less than half of the CO2 that a coal power plant emits. And in a 2 degrees world, gas plays an important role. But if we talk a net zero world, then the role of gas declines compared to today's level. And so there is a difficult decision to be made. Well, what future are we talking now? 60–70% of global energy use and CO2 emissions today takes place in countries that have said we want to be net zero by mid-century. So logically, natural gas does not play a very important role if the whole world goes net zero. I showed that the projections are for a gas use that is then declined by 20 to 50% compared to today's level, if the whole world moves in that direction. But if we talk 2 degrees, then most scenarios say, well, gas use in 2050 is roughly at today's level. So it's tricky to say what will happen with natural gas going forward. Huh?
Yeah, thank you for that. And as a parting shot, how on earth do we get society to get behind the transition?
One key thing is probably innovation. Continue to work that the cost of these technologies go down, and continue to work that the range of deployment broadens. I think that the most recent notable development is that battery costs have come down very rapidly. So soon electric cars will be the cheapest form of road vehicle transportation. And if there's an economic case, the world will move in that direction. At the same time, there is a number of hard to decarbonize sectors in industry and aviation and shipping, where we really will need the right incentives. So there is a role for governments, and there is a role for also international development to focus more on these sectors, and to really make sure that development priorities are set such that and policy priorities are set such that they create the right environment to move in this direction.
Thank you. If there is no more questions, let me just check with my colleagues if there's anything on the Facebook chat that maybe we need to address. But I can't see anything on my side, so I will assume that we have addressed everybody's questions. Thank you so much, Dolf, for taking your time to chat to us. I think this was very enlightening. This is a difficult road. I think the world has to walk, but I think with enough voices like yours and many others, I think we can get to a a net zero condition at some point. I don't know if 2050 is possible, but I think we can certainly get there. So thank you so much for that conversation. David, I will now hand over to you, just to remind our participants of our next session. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and thanks also from my side to Dolf, really enlightening, and thank you for making it so accessible as well to those of us who are not from the more technical disciplines. And I've just asked everyone to show their appreciation to you, so you should see in the chat, or people using the jazz hands function, which you can find under reaction. Some people were a bit surprised by that. To thank you for your wonderful seminar. Thank you so much. And if you would like more and to engage with the question of, I think Dolf started discussing this, but issues around business and the transition on the 29th of July. We look forward to having you there at the same time, 5:30. And please join. I posted the link, naomi@scipac.org.za, and we look forward to having you join us on the 29th. So without further ado, thank you once again, Dolf, and good night or good afternoon to everyone who's joined us.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much, Vazi.
Thank you.
Thank you, much appreciated.